Emma, a resilient mother of two, was struggling to keep her late husband's small restaurant afloat in a snowy little town, balancing her children's needs and mounting bills. But when a mysterious note leads her to a life-changing revelation, everything she knows is turned upside down. A story of kindness, loss, and unexpected friendship that will touch your heart. Emma, 35, was a strong woman living for her two children. Her life had been deeply shaken a year ago when she lost her husband. The pain of losing him left a deep wound in her heart every day, but her love for her children and her determination to secure their future kept her going. They lived in a small town and owned a little restaurant, a dream she and her husband had worked toward for years. To Emma, this restaurant wasn't just a source of income, it was also the legacy of her husband's dreams. Before her husband's passing, Emma worked as a laborer in a fabric factory. After his death, she decided to quit her job to take over the restaurant, ensuring her husband's hard work wouldn't go to waste. She worked tirelessly day and night to run the restaurant and raise her children, but making ends meet with the restaurant's limited income was no easy task. The added expenses of winter made things even harder for her. That day was no different from any other. She was busy with the restaurant while also tending to the customers. Outside, snow was falling heavily, wrapping the town in a quiet white blanket. Through the window, Emma saw that the world beyond the cozy interior of the restaurant seemed desolate and lonely. The loneliness in her heart felt even deeper during these winter days. Lost in her thoughts, she glanced at her watch. It was past 5 p.m. She suddenly jolted and murmured to herself, "Oh no, where did the time go?" She quickly moved to the kitchen. The soup of the day was a special vegetable soup, a winter favorite among her customers. It was the kind of recipe even kids who disliked vegetables couldn't resist. Emma filled a large bowl of soup, carefully packed it, and added fresh bread to the brown paper bag. Finally, she wrote a small heartfelt note on a piece of paper, "Enjoy your meal." After preparing the package with care, Emma stepped out of the restaurant. The cold air hit her face, but the peaceful silence of the snow gave her a sense of comfort. The smell of the warm soup wafting from the bag in her hands seemed to lift the gloom of the moment. Walking through the snow, Emma smiled, carrying the joy of delivering hope and warmth to someone in need. Emma, holding the brown paper bag tightly, stepped into the neighboring shop, the woodworking studio of the town's well-known carpenter, Richard, with a warm smile. Inside, Richard was carefully sanding a large table. His long white beard was dusted with sawdust, and his hands, slightly reddened from the cold, moved with the precision of a seasoned craftsman. His strong but aged hands, shaped by years of labor, worked with the meticulous care of an artist. His eyes remained fixed on the sanding surface, fully absorbed in his work. The smell of wood filled the air, adding a sense of peace and nostalgia to the workshop. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more heartfelt stories. Let's continue. Richard, nearly 70, was an experienced carpenter. Years ago, he had lost his closest friend and life partner, his wife. Since then, he had sought solace in his work, using it to fill the void of loneliness. This solitude had made him gruffer and more withdrawn. Instead of retiring, he immersed himself further in his craft, trying to forget the memories of the past amidst the clouds of sawdust. Richard had an extraordinary talent. He could recall any piece of furniture he'd seen once and recreate it in exact detail. His reputation brought him orders not only from the town but also from nearby cities. However, as he aged, his pace slowed, which reduced his income. Emma had known Richard as a regular customer at the restaurant before she lost her husband. Richard used to praise her husband's cooking every time he ate there. Since her husband's passing, Emma hadn't forgotten Richard even for a day. To her, this grumpy and solitary old man wasn't just a customer, he was a friend who shared the same pain. Since losing his wife, Richard hadn't set foot in the kitchen, not even to cook a simple meal for himself. As he aged, this became even more challenging. Surviving on occasional orders and minimal income, Richard had a special place in Emma's heart, almost like family. Every day, Emma would bring Richard a meal from her restaurant, always at the same time. Richard had insisted on paying for the food on multiple occasions, but Emma had come up with a subtle solution to spare his pride. They had a playful arrangement. Richard would recommend Emma's restaurant to any client visiting from the city, providing free promotion and driving new customers her way. For Emma, this wasn't about advertising, it was her way of ensuring Richard could enjoy a hot meal without feeling obligated to pay for it. Richard had agreed, not because he felt the need to repay her, but because the simple joy of eating a warm meal in the quiet of his workshop was priceless. Hearing the door open, Richard looked up, brushing sawdust off his hands, and saw Emma. "Welcome," he said in his usual curt, clipped tone. Emma, her cheerful smile unwavering, held out the paper bag. "It's vegetable soup day," she announced with enthusiasm. Richard offered a faint smile, partially hidden behind his beard. "Ah, the soup that sounds unappealing but tastes like magic," he replied with a soft chuckle. Dusting off his hands, he took a deep breath and added, "Thank you, Emma. It's cold out, and this soup is just what I need tonight," his gratitude evident in his tone and eyes. Emma carried Richard's heartfelt thanks with her. She understood his loneliness and struggles as she faced the same pain in her own life. Yet neither of them spoke about it. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a bond that didn't require words but was deeply shared. Richard, looking at Emma, could sense the weight of her burdens. He thought to himself, "At least I had many years with the woman I loved. But this young woman, so young, alone with 2 children in this world. I hope her children don't leave her behind when they grow up. Being alone makes this world even crueler." As the snow fell outside, covering the windows of the workshop, these 2 solitary souls found warmth and strength in the small acts of kindness they shared, holding on to life in their own quiet ways. Emma returned to her small restaurant and immediately checked on her customers' needs. After refilling one person's coffee, she sat down behind the counter. For a brief moment of peace, she watched the snow falling outside. The snowflakes danced against the window, and the weight in her heart lightened slightly. But the calm didn't last long. When her children came home from school, Emma made sure they were fed before they returned to their small home. While the children worked on their homework, Emma reviewed the month's income and expenses. The numbers told a stark truth: things weren't looking good. On top of everything, her children needed winter clothes. They were growing fast and their old ones no longer fit, but buying new ones seemed almost impossible for Emma. As she got lost in these thoughts, tears rolled down her cheeks. The mere thought of the restaurant no longer being able to sustain them was devastating. Should I think about selling it? She wondered. But the idea of selling the place her husband had worked so hard to create weighed heavily on her. Her longing for him and her deep connection to his memory made the thought even more painful. Unexpectedly, there was a knock at the door. She wasn't expecting anyone at this hour, and it made her uneasy. Approaching the door, she looked through the peephole and was stunned to see Richard standing outside. When she opened the door, Richard asked, "What's wrong?" with a gentle smile, seeking permission to come in. He was holding 2 large bags. Emma quickly made him a warm cup of coffee and sat across from him. "What brings you here, Richard?" she asked. Richard remained silent for a moment, then spoke hesitantly. "I know you're a proud person. I've been debating whether to do this or not, but, Emma, I can see you're struggling. I know how hard it can be to ask for help, but I understand what you're going through." Emma's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't understand why Richard was saying this on such a cold winter evening. Richard continued, "I'm not in the best situation myself, as you know. But today I stopped by the church. They were collecting donations for winter clothing. I noticed your kids have outgrown their winter wear. I thought maybe you'd hesitate to do something like this yourself." He handed her the bags, which contained 2 coats and 2 pairs of boots. "They're not brand new, but I hope they'll be useful," Richard added, lowering his gaze. Emma couldn't hold back her tears. "It's like you read my mind, Richard," she whispered, her voice heavy with emotion. Richard, slightly embarrassed, said, "I just didn't want your kids to be cold." The gratitude swelling in Emma's heart was too immense for words. As Richard gave her a supportive look and headed back to his home, Emma felt an overwhelming sense of thankfulness. For the first time in a long while, she realized just how desperate she'd been feeling. But Richard's act of kindness reminded her that she wasn't alone, that there were still good people around her. The next morning, Emma decided to try something different when choosing the day's soup. She settled on preparing a hearty chicken soup with fresh ingredients. As the soup simmered, its delicious aroma filled the restaurant, enticing everyone who walked in. The morning preparations were already completed, accompanied by the comforting steam rising from the bubbling pot. Emma dressed her children in the winter clothes Richard had brought the previous evening and sent them off to school. As she saw them off at the door, her eyes filled with pride and love. Watching them cheerfully walk through the snow, Emma waved with a genuine smile. Life was hard, but in that moment, everything felt right. The day unfolded at its usual busy pace. As customers came and went, the warm and welcoming atmosphere of the restaurant gave Emma a small sense of peace. By 5 p.m., as always, she prepared a package for Richard. She carefully packed the steaming chicken soup and a fresh sandwich into a brown paper bag. But when she stepped outside, she couldn't believe her eyes. Richard, uncharacteristically, was sitting at one of the restaurant's tables instead of eating in his workshop. Stunned, Emma approached him with a playful tone. "Have you decided to socialize? Or am I dreaming?" she teased. Richard smiled faintly. "A little change every now and then doesn't hurt," he replied. Emma sat down beside him and they began chatting. But something about Richard's demeanor was different. Emma sensed an emotional weight in him, as though he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. She gently prodded, trying to uncover what was on his mind, but Richard avoided giving her a direct answer. Still, the slight glistening in his eyes and his withdrawn demeanor tugged at Emma's heart. It was clear he was struggling silently, battling an inner turmoil while trying to maintain a strong front. At one point, Richard shifted the conversation with a touch of his usual gruffness. "Don't you have work to do? Go tend to your other customers," he said, his tone sharp but laced with affection. Emma smiled knowingly at his attempt to divert attention. "Yes, sir, enjoy your meal. I hope you like the soup," she replied with a playful nod. Richard turned his focus to his bowl and began eating slowly. Emma gave him some space, moving away to tend to other tasks. Yet, she felt a sense of comfort knowing that Richard had chosen to be there. His presence was a sign that, despite his struggles, he didn't feel completely alone. In their own quiet way, these two solitary souls had found a way to support each other, facing life's challenges together, one small gesture at a time. While Emma was in the kitchen, Richard quietly left the restaurant without saying goodbye. As she cleared his table, she wondered why he hadn't even said, "See you." On the table she found a folded piece of paper. When she opened it, she saw a phone number and a single sentence, "Call this number when the time comes." Emma paused, confused. This was unlike Richard. With the note in hand, she decided to head to Richard's workshop. But when she arrived, the shop was closed and no lights were on inside. A sense of unease settled over her. Maybe he's just tired, she told herself, trying to calm her nerves. Still, the situation wouldn't leave her mind. When the time comes. What does that even mean, she wondered. Unable to find an answer, she resolved to finish her work and visit Richard's home that evening. After settling her children at home that night, Emma went to Richard's house. She knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Just as she was about to leave, an elderly neighbor opened his door and said, "They took Richard to the hospital." Emma's heart sank. "What happened? Is he all right?" she asked anxiously. The man replied calmly, "He's been sick for a long time, but he always refused to go to the hospital. Today he got worse and they had no choice but to take him." Emma rushed to the hospital. After getting information at reception, she found Richard's room. When she entered, she saw him lying in bed, connected to several machines. The sight of him like this deeply shook her. Seeing Emma, Richard managed a faint smile. "Ah, you shouldn't have come," he said weakly. Emma quickly moved to his side and held his hand. "What's going on, Richard?" she asked. Richard took a deep breath and, with a weary expression, admitted, "Some of my organs have stopped working. I have no choice but to be here. But things aren't looking good." Emma pulled out the note from her pocket and showed it to him. "And what about this, Richard? What does it mean, when the time comes?" Richard was silent for a moment before letting out a deep sigh and speaking, "Emma, I'll be honest with you. The doctors have told me I don't have much time left. It seems I'll be spending what's left of it here." Tears streamed down Emma's face. "No, you don't know that," she protested. Richard gently held her hand. "But I do, Emma. I'll be reunited with Susan soon," he said, his voice filled with both sadness and a sense of peace. Pointing to the paper, he added, "That number is my lawyer's. I'm leaving my workshop to you. You can merge it with the restaurant, tear down the wall between them, or rent it out to secure a steady income. Do with it as you see fit." Through her tears, Emma whispered, "No, Richard. I can't accept this." Richard smiled, weak but full of affection. "I had no one, Emma. First your husband and then you. You brought me a warm meal every day. I'm leaving this world with a heart full of gratitude," he said. Just then, a doctor entered the room and informed Emma that visiting hours were over. Before leaving, Emma gripped Richard's hand tightly, her eyes brimming with tears. Later, when Emma spoke to the doctor, his words confirmed what Richard had said. He explained that Richard's kidneys had completely failed, he wasn't a candidate for a transplant, and he would have to remain in the hospital. Exhausted from crying, Emma returned home, unable to stop her tears during the journey. The next morning, Emma received a phone call informing her that Richard had passed away. The moment she heard the news, it felt as if the world had stopped. She sat in silence, unable to move or think. Eventually, she pulled herself together when she learned that Richard's lawyer would be coming to the restaurant to discuss his will. The lawyer read out Richard's will to Emma. Everything was clear and straightforward. The workshop was now hers. Emma organized a special funeral service for Richard. The townspeople attended, giving him the farewell he deserved. Emma knew she would carry her friend in her heart forever. Richard's kindness and selflessness had given Emma's life a new direction. She was no longer alone, her life was now filled with the traces of the friends who had left a lasting impact. Kindness has a way of returning when you least expect it, just as it did for Emma and Richard. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. See you next time.